Yesterday, as I'm recording this, I finished the main story in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Well, quote unquote finished. Even though I'm done with the main story, this game is massive, and realistically, I'll be playing this game for months. I went into this game with very high expectations, but the game somehow still exceeded them. This game is incredible, one of the greatest video games I've ever played, and realistically, one of the greatest games of all time. The main concern people were voicing about this game before it released was, will the game have enough content? But now the concern is, does it have too much content? Regardless, Tears of the Kingdom seems to be an all-around improvement of Breath of the Wild, but that doesn't mean this game is perfect. And now that I finished the story, it's time for me to voice my opinions on some things I didn't enjoy about the game. Before we get into it, these are entirely my opinions and should not be interpreted as objective fact. There are going to be points in this video that you disagree with. Just remember that I love this game just as much as you do, but I do have some nitpicks to complain about. Also, there might be times where I talk about certain story elements, so I will be giving a spoiler warning if I start talking about anything related to this game's story. So without further ado, Tears of the Kingdom is not perfect, and here's some of my complaints. So for the first segment, I'm going to be talking about annoyances I have with the game. These won't necessarily be serious flaws, but just slight nitpicks that I thought was annoying. Let's get started. Let's start with everyone's favorite collectible, Korok seeds. Just like a lot of people, I hated Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild, and I think I hate them even more in this game. And that's because there's an insane amount of these Korok seeds where you have to bring a Korok to his friend. The good thing is you get 2 seeds each time you do this, but that still isn't enough of an incentive for me to actually want to do this. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to get creative and build some kind of machine to carry the Korok in, but most of the time I just end up slowly carrying him with Ultra Hand. And my biggest problem with these is that they just aren't fun, and they often distract me from doing something that I actually want to do. So that's why I dislike Korok seeds even more than I did in Breath of the Wild. With all that being said, I can't say with certain that these Korok missions are a flaw with the game. I just personally hate doing them, which is why I usually avoid them. On to my next nitpick, let's talk about grinding. Just like Breath of the Wild, this game does feature some grinding, and I'm generally okay with grinding in video games as long as it's not too severe, but I really dislike the grind for enhancing armor in Tears of the Kingdom. I'm pretty sure you get what I'm saying here. Like when you go to the Great Fairy and she says you need 2 dragon horns and like 20 of the most obscure flour just to upgrade an armor piece once. Farming for dragon parts is so incredibly annoying. Not only do you have to locate the dragon you're looking for, but you can only get 1 dragon part and then you have to wait like 10 in-game minutes to get another. And yes, the dragons do have a set path they take, which does make it easier to find them if you know where to look. Even knowing this, it still takes a while to locate them. The cool thing is you can now land on the dragons, which I'm pretty sure you couldn't do in Breath of the Wild. Also, enhancing armor now costs rupees, which isn't the end of the world or anything, but I do think it's overkill. I mean, why do the Great Fairies need rupees anyway? Anyway, I really do like the dragons in this game, but farming for their parts is tedious and not fun at all. Another thing that's annoyed me thus far is that some monster parts just never ever drop. Seriously, I've killed like 30 Lizalfos and all I can muster out of them is like 1 Lizalfo tail and that's it. And I've had this same problem with Hinox guts and Lionel guts. I get all the other parts just fine, but it's these 3 items that I never have enough of, which results in me running around killing these guys over and over again after every blood moon. Other than that, I'm okay with grinding in this game. Grinding shrines is actually super fun, and so is activating all the light roots and the depths. I just hate grinding for monster parts that barely drop. Moving on to the next nitpicky thing, and this is an insanely subjective one. I miss the Guardians from Breath of the Wild, and I like them more than the Zonai constructs. The Zonai enemies are still cool, but I loved everything about the Guardians. I loved perfectly reflecting the massive beams with the shield. It was so incredibly satisfying. I also loved the soundtrack that played as well. It represented pure fear. And if I'm being honest, the Zonai enemies just didn't give me that same feeling. I understand why Guardians were replaced in this game. It's probably for the better, but I can't help but miss them. And the last thing I will mention before we get into the real stuff, why is there so much useless armor? There's so many armor sets in this game that are just bad for no reason. Like for example, my favorite Zelda game is The Wind Waker, but I can't use Link's outfit from that game because it just sucks. They give 20 defense maximum per set piece, but they didn't even throw any stat boosts in there. They could have given this armor an increased swim speed or an increased attack in a windy environment, something like that, but instead just nothing. I could be wrong here. Maybe this armor does have a cool set bonus that makes up for the subpar defense, but I'll never know because I'm not going to waste 1500 rupees and a bunch of materials just to find out. I had this same problem with Breath of the Wild, and unfortunately the same goes with this game. But now that we got the nitpicky things out of the way, let's move on to what I believe to be some real flaws. So I know that first segment was a little bit all over the place, but that's fine since it was just minor problems I have with this game as of right now. The one about the Guardians from Breath of the Wild isn't even a flaw, it's just something I preferred about the previous game. The first flaw I want to mention is regarding 5 new abilities in this game called the Sage abilities. And if you don't know what these are and you don't want to be spoiled, I'd recommend skipping ahead. I won't be talking about the story at all, just the abilities themselves. So the 5 Sage abilities are basically companions that follow you around in the overworld. They're basically this game's version of the champion abilities from Breath of the Wild, except one thing, they're pretty much worse in every single way. Let me explain. So first of all, walking around with the sages is honestly pretty annoying. Not only can they obstruct your view, but often get in the way of your attacks when trying to fight off an enemy. It's also just super weird having these guys follow you around. I mean, you're being followed by 4 random blue guys and a giant Zonai robot. This looks completely ridiculous. But you may be thinking, as long as their abilities are useful, their appearances don't matter, right? Well, comparing their abilities to the champion abilities from Breath of the Wild, they're kinda just mid. I only ever used 2 of the Sage abilities, Toland's Wind Gust and Yonobo's Roly-Poly Smash thingy. Other than that, the abilities are just way too situational, whereas the champion abilities were all useful 95% of the time. There is one more thing that the Sages can do though, they can also help you out in combat. There's just one problem. They are embarrassingly weak. Now, it is worth mentioning that you can upgrade their attack stats using a new item called the Sage's Will. If you collect 4 of these, you can exchange them the same way you exchange Light of Blessings from shrines. And instead of getting a heart container or a stamina vessel, you instead choose a certain sage to upgrade. I've only upgraded one of them once, but I highly doubt this will make them significantly more useful. Even if these guys do crazy damage once upgraded, I'd still rather have the utility of the champion abilities. Now, you might be thinking, if you don't like the new abilities, just turn them off. Yeah, good thinking. That way I'd be stuck with absolutely nothing. The truth is, while the Sage abilities can be useful, they're just extremely underwhelming and more aggravating than useful. You can't convince me that they're better than champion abilities. They're just way too situational. So yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm just not a fan of the Sage abilities in Tears of the Kingdom. Toland's ability is pretty useful for getting around the map faster, but so is Revali's Gale from the previous game, and I preferred that ability even if this one can also attack enemies. Revali's Gale gave you an insane amount of height, whereas Toland's Wind Gust just propels you forward for a few seconds. Sidon's ability is the definition of situational. He spawns this massive ball of water around your body. It's useful for the water temple, and that's kinda it. You can use it to give your Zora weapons a major attack boost, but there's a good chance you don't even have Zora weapons, so once again, very situational. I'd take Mipha's Grace from Breath of the Wild over Sidon's ability any day of the week. Riju's ability creates an electrical field around a surrounding area and will strike any area you hit with an arrow. This is quite literally a worse version of Urbosa's Fury from Breath of the Wild. Yes, it recharges quicker, but everything else is significantly worse. Yonobo's ability allows you to essentially play bowling by using him as the ball. You can send him flying towards enemies, and while it doesn't do an insane amount of damage, it can be used to quickly destroy large boulders blocking your path. This ability can also be used when driving a vehicle like a minecart or a flying device. I think this is the only ability in the game that is just as good as its predecessor. Daruk's Protection was a good ability, giving you instant protection from any attack, but will take a while to recharge after the ability is used 3 times. I think both abilities are pretty decent, but Breath of the Wild only had 4 champion abilities, whereas Tears of the Kingdom has 5 Sage abilities. And I feel bad for saying this, but the 5th and final Sage ability is my least favorite one by far. The 5th Sage is Minoru, and she gives you this massive robot robot that you can ride upon, or the robot can just follow you around like the rest of the sages. But this robot is pretty bad in my opinion. Just like the others, it doesn't do great damage, and its main function is the riding feature, which I will never willingly use. This robot is incredibly slow, and it doesn't feel great to control either. It's also just pretty huge, and while the game does its best to keep the thing from getting in your way, it still frequently does. You can attach things to the robot using fuse, which is pretty cool, but at the end of the day, it's just extra work that doesn't pay off. But yeah, that's basically all I wanted to say about the sage abilities in this game. Overall, they aren't terrible abilities, but coming off of the champion abilities from Breath of the Wild, I expected much better and much more interesting abilities in Tears of the Kingdom. Instead, we got 4 random blue people and an incapable robot that obstructs your vision. I know that's harsh, but I really dislike these abilities, and I do think they are a flaw with the game. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Now let's move on to the next flaw. So for the next flaw, we're going to talk about a feature that was very controversial when Breath of the Wild released: weapon durability. I want to start by saying I am not against the concept of weapons breaking, so this segment won't just be me complaining about how weapons break in these games. Instead, I'll be talking about how Tears of the Kingdom handles weapon durability pretty poorly, just like Breath of the Wild did. The concept itself isn't inherently bad, but the execution is less than ideal. First of all, there's no way to check the durability of your weapons. Weapons will start flashing red once they're a couple uses away from breaking, but that's not good enough. There needs to be a way to check the durability of the weapon no matter what the durability is. There's no excuse for this to not be a feature in the game. If you're going to have a durability system in your game, give us a way to see it. So now let's talk about the actual durability of the weapons themselves. And this isn't entirely objective or anything, but weapons in this game break way too frequently. It's like my weapons break after fighting 2 enemies. Because of this, the game feels like an endless cycle of constantly obtaining new weapons, breaking them in a few minutes, and then finding replacements. And there's no weapon with a more insulting durability than the Master Sword. The Master Sword is a solid weapon in this game, but it runs out of energy insanely quick, which makes me not even want to use it. It doesn't permanently break though. Instead, it runs out of energy and takes 10 in-game minutes to recharge. I understand why the Master Sword isn't just completely overpowered, because then it would be the only weapon you ever use, but there has to be some kind of balance that could have been made. It just doesn't seem right that the legendary sword that seals the darkness runs out of energy after defeating a few bokoblins. It's not like this automatically makes the Master Sword a terrible weapon, far from it. You can get the Master Sword to do over 80 damage depending on what you fuse to it. That's more damage than the Master Sword could ever do in Breath of the Wild. I think Tears of the Kingdom does have better overall combat than Breath of the Wild, mostly because the brand new fuse mechanic is amazing. Being able to create your own weapons in a Zelda game feels pretty magical, but I'm still a little disappointed that there's still really poor durability and there isn't a way to measure it either. Now yes, you can repair weapons by finding an enemy called a rock Octorok. If you drop your weapon on the ground, the Octorok will eat it and spit it out. This will completely repair the weapon. If I'm being honest, I'm not a fan of this system. This just feels really strange. Instead of giving us a proper repair system, we find some random enemy and feed it our weapons. Not only does it not work with certain weapons, but each Octorok can only repair 1 weapon, so if you can't find any more, or you've used every single one on the map, you have to wait until the next blood moon to repair your weapons. I don't know, I think this whole system is kinda weird. The thing is, if weapon durability was better to begin with, we wouldn't even need a repair system, so that's the problem. Weapon durability hasn't improved since it was introduced in Breath of the Wild. You have to constantly get new weapons to replace your broken ones. You know how sharks are constantly losing teeth and replacing them immediately after? That is exactly how combat feels in this game, at least when it comes to weapon durability. Now let's move on to the next topic. Moving on to the final major flaw of the video, we're going to talk about performance. Let's start by pointing out that Tears of the Kingdom, just like Breath of the Wild, runs at 30 frames per second. Now this shouldn't be a surprise, we all knew this game would run at 30 FPS. And while a 30 FPS game in 2023 is pretty ridiculous, Nintendo can get away with it because of how great their products are otherwise. But the fact that this game is 30 FPS isn't the main problem. The main problem is the inconsistency of the frame rate, commonly referred to as frame drops. Tears of the Kingdom, just like Breath of the Wild, does not have a consistent performance, and for some reason even mentioning this will piss people off, but these are probably the same people who defended Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's like people feel personally attacked if you say these games could run better. It shouldn't be controversial to say that Tears of the Kingdom has frame rate issues. We shouldn't pretend that this game runs well because that mindset doesn't create demand for improvement. We should credit this game for all the amazing features it has and critique it for its missteps. Just look at this footage. This area of the game is running about as well as Ocarina of Time does. I've experienced some pretty bad frame drops in this game. There's nothing that absolutely ruins the game or anything, but it can make the game frustrating at times. I can't even really blame this game for the performance issues. I hate to say it, but it seems like the limitations of the Switch hardware held this game back in terms of visuals and frame rate. But at the end of the day, Tears of the Kingdom has performance issues and we shouldn't ignore that. Ignoring this problem and pretending it doesn't exist will create an industry where companies don't feel the need to optimize their games. Tears of the Kingdom is incredible. So far it's the favorite to win Game of the Year, but it's just not a perfect game. And that's basically all I have to say about the performance. It could and should be better. I love the Nintendo Switch, but it's beginning to seem less and less powerful as each day goes by, and I wish this beautiful piece of hardware could just be a little bit more powerful. And there you have it. Those are all of my major issues with Tears of the Kingdom, as well as some minor things discussed earlier in the video. There's still a few things I could have talked about, like clunky interfaces and trying to climb during the rain, but I covered most of what I wanted to mention, and I'm happy with the way this video turned out. So that's it for me. Now that I've successfully rambled for over 15 minutes, I'm gonna hand it over to fellow YouTuber Landorantom to discuss some of his issues with the game, and make sure you subscribe to his channel. He's so close to 10,000 subscribers if he didn't hit it by the time this video is out. Take it away, Lando.
Hey everyone, so I am a massive Zelda fan and I've played almost every Zelda game, including Tears of the Kingdom, and I have to say, it is probably one of the best games ever made. But even with that, there are some big problems with the game that were sort of disappointing. They didn't change the entire game for me, and they're probably going to be different problems than the ones that Wyvern mentioned. But for me, the biggest problem about this game is the armor. And this is kind of a weird problem. I haven't heard anyone else talk about this, but in my opinion, they didn't add enough new armor, like at all. The new armor sets they did add were really cool. Some of them are really weird and I wouldn't really want to like wear it. Like for example, the armor set you get after you beat all the shrines is a little weird, but some of them are really cool. But in my opinion, they did not add enough new armor at all. They reused, I think, almost every armor set from Breath of the Wild besides like the ancient armor and another one I can't remember. I was hoping when I would start the game that as soon as I would go to the new town, I'd be able to buy this certain set of armor, kind of like you did in Kakariko Village, but there was barely any new armor I could get. Most of the new armor in the game was like hidden behind these weird side quests, which they were fun, but it was kind of disappointing for me. Another problem I have with Tears of the Kingdom is kind of small, but I think it is actually a really good point that could be something that Nintendo could patch, or not really patch, but like fix in an update, is that the turning whenever you make vehicles is not very good, like at all. It's actually kind of bad, and it's really annoying because I'll make these awesome vehicles and hovercrafts and motorcycles and trucks, and when I try to turn them, they turn so unbelievably slow. And honestly, that was really disappointing for me, and it can kind of demotivate me to make any other cool creations with Ultra Hand. And this can be seen as sort of a small problem, but in my opinion, it is pretty big. Besides those, I think the only other problem I've had with Tears of the Kingdom is that the Master Sword still somehow breaks really easily. It just doesn't make sense. It's supposed to be like the most powerful sword that the game hypes up, and when you finally get it, it's so cool, and you can fuse stuff with it, and it's just amazing. But it still breaks really easily to like simple enemies like Bokoblins. It was just really weird. I really hated that in Breath of the Wild, and I really wanted them to find a way to make it better in Tears of the Kingdom, and it still kind of sucks. And I understand why it breaks, but it breaks so fast to the weakest enemies that at that point it's just like, it's just really dumb in my opinion. Now keep in mind, all the problems that I mentioned don't really make Tears of the Kingdom that much worse. It's just some things that I think Nintendo probably could have thought out more. This game is still a masterpiece though.
100% agree with pretty much everything he had to say. I also love how we pretty much said the exact same thing about the Master Sword with the exact same analogies. And I didn't give him a set script either, so it's just a funny coincidence. Also, I definitely agree that the armor in this game could have been handled better, because I had to use the regular highlight Hylian set for a good portion of the game. Vehicle controls, I mean, they're pretty bad and they've definitely given me some frustrating moments, but I think the biggest flaw with the Zonai devices is that they just randomly disappear after a while, and this is really dumb considering there's already a battery mechanic in the game. I should have mentioned this earlier in the video, but his point about the vehicles did make me think about it more. But I mean, it's not like the Zelda franchise is known for having good controls. Big thanks to Landorantom for sharing his thoughts. The link to his channel is in the description. And with that, thank you for watching. Let me know what you agreed with, what you disagreed with, and also let me know down in the comments if you have any other flaws with this game. That's it for today's video. Have a blessed summer, and I'll talk to you later.